once again, hi, and thank you for tuning into our devotionals. So, during these last several months, many of us have been scrambling to try to make sense of all that's happening in our world. We've been scrambling to try to figure out how to continue to do our jobs, how to be parents, how to support those who are loved ones of ours who may be more isolated and in need of care. And there's been so much scrambling going on to try to figure out how to redo or do more effectively many of the things that used to just come natural or used to be things that we just didn't think about that much. And that actually got me to thinking. I know that for pastors and many of us church leaders, we've really been scrambling to try to figure out how do we now live out and continue to be the church in the midst of a pandemic? How do we seek to find ways to make sure people are safe, but at the same time still connected with the ministry? And so we've just been scrambling. I mean, I talk to pastors and other church leaders, and we're just scrambling. And I know that that's the case for everyone. And it's been a real big focus for me, and I'm just so grateful for the support that I've been getting. But just recently, I guess as I was thinking about this, I ran across this story that caused me to pause. It wasn't really this particular story, but this story represented the thing that made me pause. Now, the story that I'm about to read is really quite basic of a story. And by basic, I'm not trying to say that the fact that Jesus performs an amazing miracle is basic. I mean, it is amazing. And I'm also not trying to say that the person that comes to Jesus with leprosy in need of help does not have an amazing faith, because that is amazing. But by basic, I mean it's just as you read through the Gospels, you see these kinds of stories happen often, and it's kind of interesting because in some ways we just stop paying attention to how amazing these stories actually were. But anyway, I want to read this passage. It comes to us from Luke chapter 5, and I'm going to begin at verse 12. Let's listen to this story, this very common story that we see often happening in Scripture. Once, when Jesus was in one of the cities, there was a man who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he bowed with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." Then Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched the man and said, "I do choose. Be made clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him, and he ordered him to go and to show himself to the priests, as was commanded by Moses, making an offering for your cleansing for the testimony to them. But now, more than ever, we hear after this healing, but now more than ever, the word about Jesus spread abroad. Many crowds would gather to hear him and have their diseases cured. But Jesus would withdraw to a deserted place and pray. So again, this is the story that kind of came to mind. And the interesting thing about this story is it represents many of the aspects of ministry that are so important to us. I mean, there's this aspect of Jesus' care and concern for anyone who comes to him. That's such an important aspect of what we need to do as ministers. There's this important aspect of this man who has faith in Jesus, and we recognize this is a very important aspect of our ministry, that people would come to our ministries and have a need that we can then meet. There's also this wonderful idea here that Jesus is still trying to support the traditions. He tells the man to go show himself to Moses to pay his offering for his cleansing. Jesus really wants to kind of work within that system. So it's just this wonderful picture of the way ministry happens and what we are about as ministers and as pastors and as church members, because we want a ministry that will attract others, and we want a ministry that is there and will respond to the needs of others, and we want this ministry to be attractive in such a way that it grows as the interest in Jesus grew after this healing. And so as I looked at that, I thought, yeah, everything that I want to do as a pastor is reflected in that story. All these ways in which we meet the needs of those who come to us, these ways in which our ministry grows to reach out even more, the way our ministry respects the traditions and those who have come before us in terms of what it is that we are trying to do. All those aspects of ministry are right there. And as we begin to rethink what it is we do, we look at all those aspects of ministry, and yes, we want to embrace all those things. But you know, there's something that I left out as I just went through that litany of things that we want to do as pastors and the things that we can learn from this passage of Scripture in how Jesus ministers. There's one thing I left out. I'm wondering if any of you caught it. It was right there at the very end. Verse 16. It says, "But Jesus would often withdraw to a deserted place and pray." Yeah. I left that out in that litany of things that we as ministers are trying to do. In terms of our rethinking what it is to do, we've thought we've got to find ways to attract people to this gospel. We've thought about ways in which we need to reach out to those in need. We thought about ways for our influence and our message to grow so that we can reach more people. We thought about ways to do all of that, and I wonder, have we listened to that last part of how Jesus also often would take time to pray? And I got to say, sometimes I'm not always good at that. I mean, I get myself so busy in trying to do all those things of ministry that I forget that I need to pause. I need to put myself in a deserted place where it's just God and me. And you know, it's not just ministry. It can be any aspect of our lives. If we feel stressed out because of what's going on at work, and we're trying to figure out what we need to do, we can be wonderful at figuring out all those things, but there's something that Jesus models here in this. I mean, Jesus knew what to do, and yet he still takes time to pray. If we're struggling as parents, if we're struggling in any aspect of relationships in our lives, if we're struggling personally, I mean, just this idea that we can try to get it all figured out, and even if we do, Jesus models this idea that there's a time where we need to stop and pray. You know, Jesus prayed any time he was preparing to do some great task. Like before he began his ministry, he went off into the wilderness where he was tempted, but really he went there to pray. There's this idea that Jesus goes off to pray after he's done some big miracle or something, after he's performed this great thing where Jesus just needs to be recharged. So he prays in order to be recharged, like after he had fed 5,000 people. Jesus also models this idea that he needs to pray to work through grief. We see that when he hears that John the Baptist had been killed, Jesus goes off by himself to pray. Jesus prays anytime he is about ready to make a decision. We see that Jesus went off by himself and prayed before he called his disciples. In times of distress, we see Jesus modeling the need to pray. Like when he went to the garden before his arrest and crucifixion, you see Jesus models this need to pray in preparation, to recharge, to work through grief, to help make the important decisions, to face times of distress. And that needs to be just as important in our aspects of ministry as well as in all aspects of our life. Taking time to put ourselves in a position where we might seek the presence of God through through prayer is an aspect of ministry and probably, perhaps, an aspect of each of our lives that we need to look at that model of Jesus. So I invite myself first, and then I invite you to consider, perhaps, in the midst of all that's going on, when you're trying to figure out everything that's happening, to consider the times that you need to sit back and just pray, to listen for the voice of the Spirit. Thanks so much.